Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Driven Podcast. I'm Dave Mariani, the CTO and co-founder of AtScale. And I got another couple of founders as guests today on the podcast. So I'd like to introduce you to Ryan Janssen, who's the CEO and founder of Zenlytic. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Dave. Pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for hosting.
And Paul Blankley, who's the CTO, like me, and founder of Zenlytic. So welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thanks, Dave. Excited to be here and excited for our conversation today. We've got a lot of great topics queued up.
Yeah. So, hey, so there's so much talk about Gen AI and natural language query. We had just conferences just last week from Snowflake and Databricks. It was all the talk of the conference. Lots of excitement around it. And you two guys have started a company that's right in the heart of Gen AI and analytics and natural language query. So I would love for you guys just to and maybe you, Ryan, you could start just talk a little bit about yourself and Zenlytic and what you guys do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll start with Zenlytic. We like to say Zenlytic is the world's first self-serve BI tool. And the reason we say that, first it raises eyebrows, but we say that because in our experience, and we can explain our origin story after this, in our experience, a lot of the BI tools out there are really by analysts for analysts, and there's little SQL windows popping up, or you have to know one or more programming languages or whatever to really get the full value out of them. If you don't have that ability, if you don't know how to think in terms of data and things like that, quite often you're limited to a fairly static dashboard experience. So our goal broadly has always been to be the world's best self-serve BI tool, and that's sort of revolutionized, I suppose. That's become accelerated, and we've embraced some of the developments in LLM technology to really make that happen. And Paul and I actually originally met studying AI in master's degrees, and we have always sort of had some sort of language component in the tool, but things changed a lot in sort of December this year when the capabilities of LLMs, especially the ones led by OpenAI, just started to kind of skyrocket. And that allowed us to unlock a lot of new functionality. I mean, it went beyond just better comprehension. It actually allowed us to add this sort of always-on instant AI data analyst chatbot, which is kind of a new paradigm for working with data. But it turns out that's actually sort of one of the necessary conditions for having a really great self-serve experience.
Yeah, and so tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to Zenlytic.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Paul?
Yeah, totally. So Ryan and I met in grad school. We met at Harvard doing master's degrees in AI. This is right around when the first Transformer paper was published. So we got to see a lot of the current sort of LLM technology go from early, everyone's like, wow, what is this Transformer thing? This is pretty crazy, into, its current incredible instantiation now. So we worked on a bunch of projects together there. And then right after that, we started a consultancy, setting up a lot of these data stacks, working with a bunch of the existing BI tools. That experience led us directly into starting Zenlytic, where it was like self-serve is not solved, not even close. And, we need this next wave of large language models to be able to enable true self-serve in any organization.
Yeah, and my background is I was an engineer in my native Canada for a couple of years, but I actually ended up going to get an MBA in the UK and then becoming a venture capitalist. For about 6 years, I invested in all sorts of different types of technology deals. Then I finally came to my senses and crossed the table back to the technologist side again. Went back to grad school, which is where Paul and I met. Paul's very humble about it. He says we went to grad school together. In actuality, he carried me through it. And a lot of other people in the class. One of my favorite stories of our misadventures at Harvard was one of our major projects was with an organization called the Minor Planet Center. This was done in conjunction with the people who run it, actually. And the project was to identify if there are any asteroids that are going to hit the Earth. And the group does a great job identifying that. They've been congressionally mandated to do that. But there's a bunch of sort of computationally intractable trajectories of these partial glimpses of asteroids that they basically have to throw in a big drawer and say, okay, are these going to be, where are these asteroids going? We can't figure this out. And the original plan was to actually had this. They were building a data center that could actually handle this over the course of several months, like a cluster of computers. And Paul and the head of the Minor Planet Center worked together to build this really amazing ML algorithm that solved it on Paul's MacBook over the course of a weekend, and sort of substantially matched like 99% of these sort of unidentifiable trajectories.
Wow.
So successful, it was actually published. And so successful after that, it was actually implemented. And that algorithm is now in telescopes around the world, actually watching for asteroids to protect the Earth as we record this podcast. So long story short, Paul carried us through that program.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, Paul. So we have you to thank, or for you to I hope you're right, dude. Because if we get hit with an asteroid, it's all your fault now, right?
Yeah, well, don't make any plans for February 21st, 2032.
Man, this is when AI better be right. I don't want to have any skew in that data that you're generating there. But that's actually pretty amazing. And so obviously AI has been. You guys grew up in the AI era. So did you gravitate to large language models, or was it sort of more sort of the traditional AI, and you got interested in LLMs later on?
So we started out, like the Transform paper was published when we were actually in school. So we started out with basically that was kind of a time where like professors would rock up and say, hey, what I was going to show you today is actually not really relevant anymore. So we're going to talk about this other thing that was just published. So it was a really fun time to be in school. Just you kind of get to see like the field, galaxies forming and all that. So we've always been interested in NLP, and our product has always had an NLP component back when it was called NLP and not large language models. Right. But what that used under the hood was a lot of the sort of predecessors to, ChatGPT. So think if you've heard of Google's like BERT model before, that was what underlied a lot of our technology before. So we've been using this stuff for a while, but it just hasn't been at its level of ability until recently.
Actually, a fun fact about that is that so Zoe, our chatbot, we've named her Zoe, is a nod to the old LLMs of yore, because a lot of people don't know this. They're originally named after Sesame Street characters. So there's Elmo, and then there was Bert, and then there was Ernie, and Zoe is a character from Sesame Street. So that's just kind of an homage to the original large language models.
I love it.
And it's actually one other interesting point about that general AI versus sort of task specific. We, at least for me, I had a really transformational moment in that in our early consulting days. One of our earlier consulting clients, we were building some generalized ML models for, predict this, predict that. And, we basically built this really, really amazing predictive, there's an XGBoost or something, predictive model that could identify if, which they're going to convert. Lead scoring is a classic use case for this, right? And we gave them a big list of emails. We were like, look, here's your 10,000 emails. Like, these are the ones that are probably going to convert. And they looked at us and they're like, yes, but we're going to email all of them, right? Anyways. And we're like, well, yes, but now you know which ones are going to convert. And they're like, the vibe was kind of like, so what? And then they kind of looked over to the left and they were like, what's that? And we're like, well, we just sort of cleaned up we pulled together all your data. We cleaned it up. We made it human understandable. And then that's what we trained it on. And that's what made them really excited. And they're like, wow, we've never had this access to clean, accessible data before. And it's like, this is amazing. And we were like, yeah, but this model can predict the future. It's 99% accurate. They're like, no, but look at this clean data. And that was a big realization for me. Really, I guess about two things. I mean, first was just the importance of what's happening with data tools now, and actually reemphasizes the importance of a semantic layer, especially. The other thing is that AI is super cool, but it's important to focus on what problems it solves as opposed to how cool the tech is. And I think LLMs are getting better at that, and we're starting to see some real world applications now. And that's always been the lens that I've kind of looked at this stuff. So I guess LLMs have always felt like one of the earliest opportunities for us to really make good use of AI technology. So I guess it's always been, it's always had a special place in my heart, I suppose.
Yeah. Look, it's just kind of the same thing. I have the same sort of feeling about real time streaming. It's like most of my customers are like, I could have it in updates in 1 day. Wow, that's fantastic. And it's like, forget about streaming, guys. It's like streaming is great for very specialized use cases, but most customers out there are just want to get access to clean data daily. And it's so sad because we've done so many things in our product to make it so that you can ingest data so much faster. And they're like, a day is okay. And it's like, so, sometimes we just don't realize how, how most customers are really at the starting line, and we're sort of trying to take them, into the end zone. It's like,
100%.
we got to help them out. So that gives us some really good context about sort of where the whole idea for Zenlytic came from. So you sort of, sounds like you sort of found, you saw the importance of data, and you applied your love of AI technology to actually make that experience of exploring data much easier. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think so. There's actually an important thing too, that's highly relevant to this discussion, which I think there's actually two really important pieces, which are necessary conditions for good self-serve. One is LLMs, which we talked about. The other is actually the semantic layer, which, inherently just the ability to translate, an end user's needs, commercial, business user regular speak type request into the complexities of a modern data warehouse. I mean, that feels very essential for self-serve in general. But then the overlap of those two things, I think, is very powerful.
Yeah, and that I'm a big proponent of the semantic layer, so that's obvious. But yeah, having that sort of that business lens, that I think of it like as like a translator. You gotta translate the technical data into business terms, and you need a human to kind of curate that process, right? But once you have that, then it opens up all kinds of interesting things, especially with LLMs, because now you've got some great training data to really help people to be able to ask questions of that data in a much more natural fashion. Pointing and clicking and using a mouse is kind of a really crude interface when you think about it, when it becomes the computer human interface, right? And so what's so exciting is that it's like we're actually using English as our language, as our programming language now, rather than SQL, and that's pretty exciting. It sounds like that's what you guys are really making a reality.
Oh yeah, and I would even say for most business users, English has been the programming language for a while. It's just that English has had to be intermediated by someone with knowledge of the business. Whether that company has a semantic layer or not, that question comes in English to an analyst, gets thrown into Jira so it doesn't get lost. And then a few weeks later, that person takes their sort of tribal knowledge of how do we do things? How do we calculate active users? How do we do revenue? And then they go get the answer, bring it back. With a semantic layer and a large language model, you can actually take that human out of the loop from most questions, where you've got the definitions, you've got the business context, and you've got the language model that's able to take that input and kind of map that loosely formed input with some follow-up questions into the real definitions that the person's asking about. And that's super exciting.
So Paul, you bring up a sort of a good question, which is, where is the, you have your data teams, you got your end users or your consumers. So, where does, who handles what in this sort of new world? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think one of the best questions to ask is like, how does the analyst role change, right? For all the analysts listening to this, this is really important. This is how, your role is going to change as AI comes in. And I think it's pretty exciting, actually. You spend more time doing high quality, high context, things that large language models can't do, things you're writing custom code, custom SQL for outside of the semantic layer. But then the other part of your job that's going to increase is maintaining that semantic layer, making sure descriptions, definitions are up to date. Because what you do by maintaining that semantic layer is you enable the LLM to answer all these ad hoc questions. Pretty much all data teams right now, at least a third of their time, if not more, and most teams more, is spent just answering these ad hoc questions. And I think that number is going way, way down, to the point where the ad hoc questions are pretty much just, can we start tracking this data? instead
Yeah.
of, can you just go create the SQL query for me?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Like, yeah, semantic layer was really sort of the missing piece, isn't it? I mean, we had the semantic layer. Look, you guys are young. I've been around since when OLAP started, and OLAP really was for me revolutionary because I learned SQL and wrote SQL and became a SQL expert. But when I saw OLAP, I saw how the end user, the business user, just completely loved it and was so much more productive and did incredible things. And then OLAP as a technology failed, right? Because it's you can't pre-calculate everything. The data got to be too big and too complex for that. And then we just forgot about it for a whole generation. And literally, it's like it was me when I was at Yahoo. It's like, you know what? It's like, gosh, I just need the semantic layer part of OLAP because that's was really the gem, was the semantic layer part. And so here we are talking about that again. But there was a whole generation of analysts and data engineers who just never really understood what the value of the semantic layer was. And so all of the visualization tools that you guys are now competing with and blowing away, I'm sure, are all about how can I make that analyst a better SQL jockey? And that's just seemed to be completely backwards and wrong to me. And so it seems like we're bringing it back to reality where we're saying, hey, anybody should be able to ask questions of data, not just somebody who knows how to write SQL.
Yeah, absolutely. Something really magical happens when you put when you combine a domain expert's domain expertise with the ability to quickly effortlessly have access to data that just you can't quite get when you're doing the quick data pulls and you're going back and forth. And first, that's a much slower process in general, but the sort of insights that come up when you have a really, really fat pipe into what's going on, and you already have that human expertise, whether you're a performance marketer or a sales op, whatever it is that you're an expert in, that's where really, really effective like data usage happens, in my opinion, basically. And the BI tool thing is really interesting because you covered something that I've always really my worldview about BI tools is that we two things have always happened, right? So like the first is that it's been sort of a monotonic progression, or at least a long arc of progression towards better capabilities for self-serve users, right? In the beginning, it was just static dashboards. Then it was sort of filterable dashboards. Then you could drill a little bit, and then you could slice by a few things though a lot. Then you could slice by everything with a semantic layer. So like it's been a progression of increasing self-serve capabilities, and then it's always been what's possible has been dictated by the availability of compute, right? So like OLAP existed because there wasn't really enough computing hardware to actually run those queries live, for example. And like, so whatever was possible at the time was dictated by the compute. And we're rapidly now entering a world where the cost of compute is essentially free, right? So what gets me really excited is like what new paradigms for consuming data are going to be unlocked as the cost of compute goes down to zero. So that's a very top-down sort of VC point of view.
I love it.
I'm excited about it. Yeah,
I love it. I love how you still got that VC hat on. I'm sure your fundraising is much easier, being that you've been on the other side of the table, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been interesting actually. Yeah, I think it's a good tool set to have for sure. I've learned a lot on the other side of the table, even though. I was a VC. I saw thousands and thousands of pitches, and I thought I kind of knew how it worked. But like, it's just kind of interesting stuff that you don't anticipate learning on the other side of the table that ends up being really, 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 really true. So I feel like I've learned a lot about the pitching process by being on both sides, and I still continue to learn how to do it as a founder now.
Yeah, and and what they're looking for too. So it always helps to be able to be at the ready there. So look, so natural language query has been around for a while, right? ThoughtSpot has been out there for as long as AtScale has. And the BI tools themselves started to add natural language query features. And you know what? It's like, and it's always been sort of nichey. It hasn't really sort of exploded. So what is the difference, guys, in today versus, those sort of early versions of natural language query?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two important lenses to look at here. The first one is just the capabilities of the language models. I mean, that's the most basic one, but it's like, instead of trying to parse a string using some, parts of speech kind of tagging or something, and just, mapping that to existing columns, basically, you're able to pass this to a large language model that can actually look at this and have a way deeper understanding of English, and can, if someone asks about New York, can see, oh, in the database, this is NY instead of New York. I should do the NY filter. Whereas previously that just would have been impossible. So the aggregation of all of that made this stuff just not really possible before. The other really important thing that I think most people miss, actually, is that you need a semantic layer to make this work. So look at Tableau's Ask Data, for instance. If you ask it like, hey, how much revenue did we have for, people in Oregon? Then it'll go up and sum up some column. For most organizations, the revenue calculation is not a simple sum on a clean table. It is a lot more complicated than that. And you're filtering out canceled orders. You're, like getting rid of gifts. You're like taking friends and family and employee stuff off. Like this is a really complicated calculation, and you're not just going to guess at getting the sum right, which means that it's kind of like a neat tool. People try it. They're like, oh, that demo works great. And then they try it on their own data, which is really complicated with sophisticated calculations for active users and revenue and these other things. And it just doesn't get anywhere because it's just trying to sum up columns. And you're not able to encode these metric definitions that really matter.
Paul, so and you're getting at sort of some of the risks of sort of relying on large language models, or, well, is that a risk, right? It's I guess with the semantic layer, you're sort of lowering that risk, but what are some of the things that can go wrong in this sort of new model?
So I think using a semantic layer is absolutely crucial here. If you don't use the semantic layer, you run the risk both of it getting a definition wrong, but also of it just changing a definition. You can't have non-determinism in metric definitions. You can't just change your definition of active users, especially as you look at different things. You could be looking at feature X, feature Y, you get to feature Z, and the LLM decides to change how it counts active users. And you think feature Z is doing great. It's not, nobody's using it. It just changed the definition.
Wow.
That's
scary.
Really scary. That's really dangerous. And you have to have, determinism in these metric definitions. And then the other thing is, even with a semantic layer, you can run into some of these problems, which means the way you have to get around that is you have to show the user everything that's going on in the query all the time. Because if you do that, if it picks, say, net revenue instead of gross, as long as you make that abundantly clear to the end user, and that's like the thing they see in the result, then, it's clear. Oh, okay, well, I asked for revenue, it picked net, I was thinking gross. I should just, clarify and ask it to do gross. That's a simple fix. If you just sort of gave a number without saying exactly what filters are applied, what time period are we looking at, what metric is this in your semantic layer with the description, it's still going to be misleading. So even with a semantic layer, it's not fully a silver bullet. You've still got to show the user all the metadata, everything that's involved in the query, so that if it does pick something that they weren't expecting, that's abundantly clear to them and they can correct it.
One interesting approach that there's a lot of people who are focused on this right now. I think a lot of those people are trying to use LLMs to write SQL.
Yes,
and I don't think that's the right approach. For as much confidence I have in the cognition abilities of LLMs, this is when you're doing public company reporting or board reporting or HIPAA sensitive reporting or anything. You can't trust a non-deterministic solution, no matter how good it is, right? And these LLMs, if you have them writing SQL, there's just a risk they're going to write bad SQL. And it's either not going to work at all, which is the best case, and the worst case is it fails silently, right? So again, that's why the semantic layer is so important, is because the SQL generation can be done in the semantic layer in a much more deterministic fashion, and that actually is a big unlock. The other actually really big unlock, which I think is also important to answer your question about why what's happening now versus people have been adding this forever. This is where LLMs really shine, is the last 6 months, they've really unlocked sort of chat versus search is how I think about it. And, we've always had LLMs inside Zenlytic. Before the revolution happened, it was a single query search, right? You type in a sentence and it would try and build it into a query for you. The fact is any analyst will tell you that those quick data pulls pretty much never end in a single question, right? There's very poorly formed questions, right? Which you have to guide the end user to, what do you mean by sales here? Do you want gross or net? And you forgot to include whatever it is. You can, fill in the gaps of the structure of that question to make sure that it's explicit data question. People want to follow up, and they want to go back and change things. They want it daily instead of weekly, or they want to be able to drill into something here, or actually tell me more about this. And those quick data pulls are always a back and forth. There's a really interesting open question right now. I think we're still figuring out collectively as the software industry how LLMs should be integrated into conventional tech. And some people are building chat windows, some people are building they're sending pre-canned prompts into an LLM, and there's all sorts of different things that are emerging. I think in our case we have a really clear use case that chat is sort of the right answer. And people ask us a lot. It's like, is this chat going to replace dashboards? Like, how are you going to get this to replace dashboards? And I think that's people misunderstand that we're not trying to replace dashboards. We're trying to replace the following conversation with the data analyst. And we have such a clear North Star with that. Like, we've been in those conversations so many times. We know what those look like. And those are a chat, right? So like, as a North Star for us, we have a clear indication that, chat is kind of the right paradigm. And it just so happens that that's what LLMs got really, really good at about 6 months ago. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that it's not a feature, it's really an application. In other words, all the big BI players have been treating natural language query as like a feature of, as a quicker, as an alternative way of building that dashboard. But you're saying that there's actually much more. It's what happens after that initial question, where chat can become a more natural interface to data.
Yeah, it's how you deeply integrate. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just gonna confirm that basically, that dashboards are super useful, and using a large language model to make creating dashboards easier is great, but dashboards are viewed a lot more than they're created. So it's like, you only get so much efficiency from helping, make creating dashboards easier. The thing that takes all the time for the data team are these ad hoc questions. And these ad hoc questions come in from someone who just doesn't quite know which thing to use, wants the best of this thing, but isn't sure quite what they mean by best. And it's like all of those question answering, that takes iteration. That takes, hey, what do you mean by this? Hey, we've got gross and net here. Which one do you want to look at? And just walking through these definitions, basically taking that business context and taking that user's question and saying, hey, we're not quite there. What time period do you want to look at? You probably don't want this for the history of the entire business. And just helping ask those clarifying questions to make sure you get down to what the person's actually thinking. And the amazing thing with the AI analyst is that this is happening in seconds. This is happening live. This isn't, comment on a Jira ticket that then has another comment on it like 5 days later. So, you can really increase the speed at which organizations use data. And that's super exciting.
I mean, that's super exciting. You've convinced me that it's definitely not a feature. It should be a whole new way of asking questions. So, look, our vision has always been that the semantic layer will help more people, use the tools they already know. Excel in most of our customers' cases, Excel is the interface, but even that's a pretty clumsy interface versus what you've been talking about here. So that's an exciting future that you guys are painting and delivering. So what else should we be looking out for? So look, it's like 6 months ago, I never heard of the acronym LLM, honestly, even though I've been tangential to AI for most of my career. So first of all, just actually back to that. Was it just a killer interface? Was that what was missing? Was just ChatGPT? We just needed an interface, or have these large language models been lurking, behind the scenes and just not been able to see light of day until there was an interface that somebody put out there that allowed people to use it? Why now? So why 6 months ago did the world change, guys? So you guys have a front row seat to answering that kind of question.
Yep, I would say that it's a combination of two things. One, the interface is crucial, right? Like previously, when you would see a paper come out, you would have to be someone like me who goes and pulls this thing in to like SageMaker or some other, like interface to like load this gigantic model into memory and test it out on a few things. It's very, very involved. And even for a technical person, it's kind of like, it's a lot of work to go and test this thing out. So the interface definitely makes a difference. But the other thing I would say is it's really fundamentally more about the availability of just massive amounts of compute and massive amounts of data. So it's like, as cost of compute, like Ryan was saying, just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Big vendors like OpenAI are able to train on just ever larger amounts of data with like longer training time, spend more compute, optimizing ever increasing numbers of parameters, it seems. And that's kind of what has unlocked this behavior, where it was before, all the previous models were kind of quite literally small in comparison to the things that people are training now. So a lot of advancements in infrastructure and available compute, I'd say, is even the bigger driver.
So, question about where things go from here. So, are large language models going to become a service of the major cloud vendors because of that? What you mentioned, that the cost of compute and the requirements of compute are so large, or will it filter down to individual enterprises where they'll be doing and building their own large language models? A lot of the sort of debate that we saw over, in the Snowflake and Databricks conference was, where does this go from here? Does it consolidate to Amazon, Microsoft, and Google in their clouds, or do you see a future where enterprises are actually using this technology specifically to solve their own use cases?
Yeah, well, you go first, Paul. I've got some thoughts too.
So I was gonna say, I definitely don't have like a silver bullet here. I do see both futures kind of happening to an extent. My general take on what I've seen so far, playing around with all these models from the open source ones to the closed source ones, is that generally the people with tons of money will probably always have the highest and most generally effective models. So my sense is that the Amazons, Anthropics, OpenAIs, Microsofts, Googles of the world will, in general, have the best sort of like general purpose large language models. I think as tool chains and open source models become easier and easier to train, we have more tooling for creating your own data. Enterprises will be able to come in and say, hey, I don't really need the thing to know about like the Calvin and Hobbes comic from forever ago. I just need it to know about this specific thing really, like, and know that really, really well. And then that's where you're going to see a lot of the open source applications. And that high level of specificity, you might be able to get better performance out of an open source model that you're fine tuning on a specific data set to do a specific thing. So I think we'll see a lot of open source models that are smaller for specific applications, but I think general purpose applications will probably still be the purview of the major cloud players.
What do you think, Ryan?
So I have a two-part thought on this. The first one is I kind of agree with Paul, where generally it seems like the most expensive, or the biggest war chest has been winning so far. The people that invest the most in the compute. I would say I'm more balanced on whether or not that will continue. I look ahead, and I look ahead by looking back. So like, and the closest example we have for predicting this is actually image generation, I think. And if you recall, like image gen was like solely the domain of Google, for instance, for a long time. And they published all these models, and OpenAI had their own, also proprietary model. But they lost that lead to either like smaller tools like Midjourney or like completely open source tools like Stable Diffusion. And it feels like those are now the go-to tools, for using image generation. And I think it's becoming increasingly democratized, I suppose. And we haven't seen a lot of really specific image gen inside, a vertical inside a company, for instance. But we could certainly see like models coming out. Now the technology is capable of that. So I would say it's certainly possible for us to see more of the open source community and third-party models gaining traction here. The other two factors in that, by the way, first, I don't know if I don't know enough to debate the technical validity of this, but the big models are bootstrapping the open source models now. So like GPT-4 outputs are being used to both rank and train the other ones, which may or may not be a good thing. And the other thing is there's just a lot more open source people out there, right? There's millions of open source researchers.
Always will be, yeah.
Yeah. And they're working hard to work around the cost of compute problems. So there's all these technologies now, like LoRa, for instance, emerging that allows you to train models with much less compute, much faster. Which, in a way, it kind of feels intuitive that the big models have a multi-year training cycle now, and it just feels like we're going to have to get to a world where that's a lot faster in the long run. And so that would kind of be a case for democratization. The second part, though, is that I don't think that's what's going to be the most important thing that happens over the next year in sort of LLM technology. I think that that's going to keep steaming ahead. But I think the real opportunity right now is in the application layer. I think so. We have not even started to use the capabilities of current tech. Like, even if we press the pause button on development now and just use what the current tech has, like, there is probably multiple generations of startups, but as an entire generation of startups and new tools that are going to be built with this LLM technology that can be done today. Is just slightly harder from a UX perspective. And like, a great example of that was my wife is currently in Japan right now. She's Japanese, and she had to give a presentation for work. And she said, "Ryan, I got to make this presentation tomorrow. Can you help me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I went on to ChatGPT. I loaded up GPT-4. And I said, "Okay, here's how I structure this presentation." And I said, "Give me a summary of these 3 books." And it gave me a little text, title, text for like 10 slides. And I said, "Okay, great. Now make it Japanese." And it said, "Okay." I don't speak Japanese, but I trusted it. And then I used this little trick that not a lot of people know about, where I said, "Okay, now can you write me a PowerPoint VBA macro that will generate this?" And it said yes, and it gave me the macro. You can go and paste that into PowerPoint. Click the run button as a visual basic macro, and it will make the whole slide deck too. It goes from like this text into an actual slide deck. And then it was like 3 clicks for design. And it wasn't even just the planning for the slides. It was actually the deck itself. And I just, sent my wife the PPTX file in Japanese, and she's like, "How did you do this in 10 minutes?" And she was just blown away by it. And, that could be an entire business, right? Like, people don't realize that you can actually build the PowerPoint directly. Like, just make an intermediate step. And I think as we see more and more of those tools start to grow in popularity and more people start to embrace those, like this is going to be the biggest Cambrian explosion of tools in the history of Cambrian explosions. Like, there's so many use cases that we could use for this tech.
Yeah, and we're seeing, like, at least the initial sort of applications have been sort of co-pilots, right? Some kind of assistant. But what you just talked about goes way beyond an assistant. To something that's like, that you're right, is a full-blown application. That's pretty amazing. Well, guys, we've talked for a long time, longer than we initially planned for. But this has been a fantastic discussion. I love what you guys are doing, and I think that really reinventing BI, which is you guys are doing, is been a long time waiting. Things. I mean, we've been dealing with the current generation for more than 10 years now, so time is ripe for a new paradigm. So I'm really looking forward to what you guys have under your sleeves, and can't wait to see what you come up with. So thanks for joining the podcast today, and for everybody who's listening, go check out Zenlytic and see what these guys are working on, because it'll blow you away.
Thanks a ton, Dave.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
Great chat.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. And thanks, and stay data driven.